Greetings. Last week, I was speaking about Jehoshaphat, the King Jehoshaphat, although the main talk I gave about him was the week before that. But last week I was talking about him again, and by accident one time I called him Jeroboam. And so some of you out there could have been saying, jumping Jehoshaphat. Mark has made a slip of the tongue. Well, I hope today that I can get by without any slippings of the tongue. Let's see how I can do. I am speaking today at a time when we're approaching the festival of Purim, the Jewish festival of Purim. And of course, it's in the Bible. It's something the Jews committed themselves to observe. It isn't commanded on the entire church. It's not something we find in Leviticus 23 as God's appointed times that he revealed to Moses, but rather it's something that in Jewish history has come up. It's the account of it is inspired scripture, and as I said, the Jewish people have accepted upon themselves to celebrate Purim, and it's as I'm speaking, it's not far away. And it's, this particular year in which I'm speaking, in the secular year of 2022, it so happens that Purim is also on St. Patrick's Day. So this year, the leprechauns will also become leprechauns. I want to talk today about a statesman and a prophet. There's a lot I could say about the book that bears his name. A lot of very fascinating technical questions there, and controversies, and a lot that can be covered there. It's a very rich subject for really digging in and discussing. But I want to talk today about some biographical material about this man. He was a statesman and a prophet, and his life is very inspiring, and what he wrote had certainly a powerful impact on human history, and very much is a background to the New Testament. Of course, I'm speaking about Daniel. My judge is God, Daniel, or God is my judge. It could also refer to just God is a judge, or God judges. This is in effect the main message of the book, that God is the Almighty Judge. He is in charge. God is in control. And Daniel projected forward into history around his time and well beyond it, all the way to the end time. And of course, we are witnessing today major events in the world, and I hope and pray as I am speaking today that those who view me are praying about the situation in the Ukraine. And of course, in years to come, there'll be many more such situations, unfortunately, until the coming of Jesus Christ. I want to go to Matthew 24, and in verse 15, I'm going to read it as the New King James has it here. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, whosoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So here Jesus Christ refers to Daniel as a prophet. You can see also similar language in Mark 13:14. Also in the Bible, in the New Testament, you have in Matthew 6, the so-called Lord's Prayer, the model for prayer, and also in Luke 11. And evidently, Jesus recited that and taught that in the Aramaic language. So if you were to read the original material or hear Jesus saying it, it would sound very much like the Aramaic prayer that's standard in Jewish tradition, which is the Cadiz. The Americans would call it the Cadiz Prayer, which is so well known in the Jewish community. It's basically an Aramaic prayer with one last sentence in Hebrew. And as I said, the Matthew 6 and Luke 11 are very much similar to it. And actually, in Daniel 2 and verse 20, we have in effect the core of that of the Cadiz prayer. Daniel 2 is that part of Daniel 2 is in Aramaic, and we have there a prayer of Daniel, and I want to get to that later on. But before I get to Daniel 2, I want to get to other miracles that occur in the life of Daniel. The book of Daniel is organized in such a way that we have 6 chapters of tremendous miracles that in effect establish the credibility of Daniel, although one of the miracles involves friends of his. And then at the conclusion of the book, we have prophecies then of the future. So now that we see the greatness of Daniel as a political figure and as a spiritual hero, we now can benefit from the prophetic inspiration that he was given. And Daniel, of course, is a book which is a basis of eschatology, a basis for the book of Revelation. Daniel is in effect like the book of Revelation in the New Testament, and it ties in with the book of Revelation. And if you look at the end of Daniel 9, in the Septuagint version, it connects directly with the ministry of Jesus Christ. It's a prophecy directly pointing us to the ministry of Jesus Christ. If we look at it in the Masoretic version, then it does link up with the intertestamental period of the Hasmoneans. And the last time that, for a significant period of time, the Jews had an independent state in their ancestral homeland. There was a brief revolution in the 2nd century. It didn't last long, where they attempted to regain independence. But really, the last time that Israel was a significant independent state on the geopolitical map was at the time of the Hasmoneans. And if you look at the prophecy of Daniel 9 in the Masoretic version, it connects with that. So I would say respect both versions there, and you'll get a very nice picture of the history of God's church leading up to the New Testament church, where it goes from being based in one ethnic group to where it becomes worldwide, international. So let's go to, or universal, you could say. I want to go to Daniel and discuss this great figure who was both a statesman and a prophet. Speaking about the Greek and version of the Bible and the Hebrew version, most of you are probably using a translation that is based upon the order of the books of the Old Testament as preserved by the Greek-speaking Jews in Alexandria, Egypt. And so you have Daniel in the prophetic section. Now, those of you who are using a Bible according to the Masoretic tradition, the tradition within the Jewish community, Daniel there is in the writings. And the writings are in the 3rd portion of the Old Testament, and they are a transition to the New Testament. And they are written by and generally and about figures of royalty, figures of government leadership. And they point to the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Jesus Christ. And Daniel had such a role. He was a statesman. He did not have the office of prophet. He certainly did prophesy, and Jesus refers to him as a prophet. But in terms of his role in the Bible, he actually did have a major political role. And very much like Joseph, he parallels the life of Joseph. Joseph, because of because God gave him the gift of interpreting dreams, he wound up as the second in command of the greatest empire of his day. He could never technically run it as an Israelite, but he ran it under the Pharaoh. And Daniel, as a Jew, could not be running, the Chaldean Empire nor the Medo-Persian Empire, but he did wind up as virtually, more or less second in command for periods of time. As I said, very much paralleling Joseph. I want to mention that we have in the book of Daniel, as I said, in preparation for his prophecies, we have 7 miracles, 6 of which directly involve him, and 1 involving friends of his. So the first miracle we find is in verse 15 of the 1st chapter. The book of Daniel covers, is like an autobiography of Daniel, and it covers roughly 70 years of his life, from his teenage years to his late 80s, I would say. So he probably lived, I suppose, around 90 years. And as a teenager, he was captured and taken into exile before the bulk of his people were. There were various invasions and exiles before the final climax in 587 BC. And he was taken captive in 606, and we see that towards the end of the book, we see an event that happens in 536. So a 70-year period there is covered. And so in his youth, in his teenage years, he is selected, among others, to be trained to become a functionary in the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the Chaldean Empire. And in verse 15, he does not want to eat the fancy, the luxurious food and drink provided. He wants to evidently be with the rest of his people who are in a state of captivity, and to eat and drink more modestly. And a miracle is performed because the person who's taking care of those things is afraid to do that. But he's tested, and after the test, he and his friends are healthier than anybody else. In verse 15, and at the end of 10 days, at Daniel 1:15, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. Thus the steward took away, on verse 16, took away their portion of delicacies, and the wine they were to drink, and gave them vegetables. He wanted water and vegetables. And so this was the first miracle, that just from a very basic diet, they had robust health as compared to the more luxurious diet of the other trainees. Now another miracle occurs. Of course, two miracles occur in the second chapter that I want to go back to in conclusion. So let me go to the third chapter now. In the third chapter, we have Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who are also known more famously as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. There was, when I was growing up, there was a song about them that was often being sung. I don't hear it so much now. But they were, of course, refusing to bow down to this idol that Nebuchadnezzar had arrogantly built, and he was going to have them burned to death. Now he eventually became a much more humane person, and this was a help going through this experience, because as you know, Jesus Christ intervened. He was very likely in the Logos stage, in the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ, the uncreated angel. He was there with them, but it would seem. But in any case, I want to go to verse 28 of Daniel 3. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel." And it could be an angel, or it could be the uncreated angel. My Bible gives you both options, has a capital A or a small a in the footnote. "Who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and they have frustrated the king's word, and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss about the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. And of course, Daniel was alive at the time and already in an important position, very important position, but very likely because of that, he was out perhaps away from the action, maybe touring in other areas, or perhaps they hadn't decided to, what's the right word, to expose him for, yet. They had gone after these three first, rather than going after him. That he might have been next on their list, but it's possible also he wasn't in that area at the time this was done. But in any case, it's part of the book of Daniel, and these were three assistants of Daniel's. So we go now to the fourth chapter, and the king has a dream. He has visions. And in this case, rather than being as so extreme as he was in Daniel 2, as you'll hear later, he was more mature at this stage in how he handled it. But nevertheless, those whom he relied upon to advise him couldn't interpret the dream for him, this vision. And Daniel comes along and does it. And Daniel is very loyal to him. He's sorry he has to give him this negative report, but he does tell him the truth. And so, of course, he comes out in great esteem, as he does through the course of the book. But at the same time, Nebuchadnezzar, who, as I told you already, and you can see, had a problem with being very arrogant and self-absorbed. And over time, he had to become more mature and develop a relationship with God to recognize, God's authority in his life, as well as in the lives of everybody else, but also in his own life. And so finally, after 7 years of being out of his mind and acting like an animal, he is restored, and evidently, I suppose, because of Daniel and other loyal members of the bureaucracy, he did not lose his authority. Somehow the country continued to operate, and perhaps most people weren't aware of the problem that the king was having. And finally he is restored, and he has his kingdom. And in verse 36 of chapter 4, at the same time my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom my honor and splendor returned to me. My counselors and nobles resorted to me. I was restored to my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added to me. So he was in better shape than he had been before, and so credit could be given to Daniel and to the others who didn't use this as an opportunity to usurp the throne. Verse 37, now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, and there's so much more I could talk about, but I'm just giving an overview of these miracles. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all of whose works are truth, and his ways justice, and those who walk in pride he is able to put down. Now Nebuchadnezzar has become a human. If you look at the vision in Daniel 7, you see that now he becomes from a predatory egomaniac to a wise, reasonable ruler who could indeed be called the head of gold, as I'm going to talk about towards the end of this discussion today. So in Daniel 5, then we have much later, we have Belshazzar ruling in Babylon, and his father evidently not present, Nabonidus. But we have, I guess it was his, I think that his, does it call him, I have to see what it talks about Belshazzar here, whether he's the, is the son or grandson of Nabonidus, but that really isn't the main issue. The main issue I'm dealing with today is the handwriting on the wall. And regarding the handwriting on the wall, as all of you know about the account, or if you don't, review it. And Daniel could not, or rather Daniel was the only one who could interpret it for everybody. Once again, we have God revealing the future to a ruler, but through a particular servant that he has chosen. In this case, again, Daniel. So we go to the conclusion of the matter. Daniel again has to tell him something unfortunate. It's a very dire prophecy, but nevertheless, the king understood that it was true. But he probably didn't realize how soon it would be carried out. It was carried out that very night. So as soon as he heard about it, he had to live through it, or actually not live through it. He had to be victimized by it. But before that happened, he was so overwhelmed with Daniel's ability to do it, of course, which God had inspired, that he honored Daniel. And so when the new empire took over, they didn't want to lose such a talented individual, and so they kept him in a very important position. So when we go from the Chaldean Empire to the Medo-Persian Empire, Daniel remains in a very important position. So let's go to verse 29 of Daniel 5. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a chain of gold around his neck and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. There's Nabonidus, Belshazzar, and then Daniel. But look at verse 30. That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain. And so, as I said, now the Medo-Persian Empire takes over, and Cyrus puts in charge Cyaxares II, I believe, is what now will become the scholarly view of people who believe in the Bible. I realize that some people do not have the same respect for the book of Daniel that I believe that I have, and hopefully that you have. But I think that the more conservative scholars will eventually come to the consensus that this is Cyaxares II. But again, that's not a major issue for today. Who was Darius the Mede? That's not our issue today. But Darius the Mede does take over the kingdom under Cyrus, and Daniel, though, has a very prominent position, but other leaders conspire against him. And he is once again, the arrogance of the ruler takes over, and he doesn't want anybody to pray to anybody but him. Incredible arrogance. And but Daniel survives the lion's den this time. Verse 25 of Daniel 6. This is the seventh miracle in the book, and I'm going to cover two of them at greater length as I have the time. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. Excuse me. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Because Darius, of course, was under Cyrus. Darius was a Mede. This was the Medo-Persian Empire. Cyrus the Persian was one who had ultimate authority, and I don't believe Cyaxares lived much longer than this anyway. He died after this, perhaps, although he had repented, but still, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's say that he realized how arrogant he'd been and how he'd been manipulated. And maybe you could argue in his favor that he was trying to consolidate his authority. He was, a new ruler, a new emperor, a new empire had taken hold, and he was trying to consolidate his authority in this new era. So maybe you can give him some benefit of the doubt there. But anyway, he did evidently repent of what he did, and he was certainly very sorry about what had happened to Daniel. He didn't sleep, and he was waiting to see if Daniel would survive. You can read the account. So anyway, I think he died shortly after this, and then we see Daniel continuing to be there. In chapter 10, we see that in the third year of Cyrus, we have more information about Daniel's understanding of prophecy. And so as I said, we're now in 536 BC, having begun in 606. So all of this is background to really what I wanted to cover in greater length, and that was in Daniel 2. So in Daniel 2, we have two miracles. So I've covered 5 already, and now I'm going to cover 7 as I get to these 2 miracles. Here the king has a vision, and this was when he was in his more arrogant stage, and so he makes a great demand of his advisors. Not only does he want the dream interpreted, but he wants them to tell him what it was before they even interpret it. he's not going to tell them the dream for them to interpret it. He's expecting them to tell him what his dream was, and if not, he's going to wipe out the bureaucracy. So Daniel is not only has his own life in danger as a young government official, but all of the major officials of the government could be literally executed if he doesn't come up with the interpretation, and he does, because as you read about it, it is God who intervenes. He and his 3 men pray, and God does give Daniel the understanding, not only of what the dream means, but even to tell the king what he dreamed. It's a very powerful miracle. And of course, the king is very impressed. Unfortunately, he still made that mistake in the 3rd chapter. But for some people, I guess it takes longer for the message to penetrate. But for at least for a time, he did have a great respect for Daniel's God, as we'll see at the end of the chapter 2. So in verse 20, as I said, we have the core of what has become the famous Cadiz Prayer, which is also, as I said, very much like Matthew 6 and Luke 11, and it's in Aramaic in the Bible. Daniel answered and said, Daniel 2:20, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are His." He acknowledged that God had given him understanding, so he talked to the king about an image that the king saw, this vision that he had, this dream that he had, and he saw a great statue, a great human figure, various materials, various metals, and iron and clay at the end, and he let me show the interpretation here in verse 38. You can read about what he saw, and many of you, I think, maybe are familiar from prior study you've done on this statue that he saw, this image that he saw. This is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king. You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over them all. So in a way, this is good, because this man had quite an ego. So in a way, he's ingratiating himself to him. But this is the fact. The man did have great power, and evidently was quite a talented person and a very powerful person. And he tells him here, "You are this head of gold." So evidently, with all of his faults, the Neo-Babylonian Empire of Nebuchadnezzar, the Chaldean Empire, was evidently, from a moral point of view, as rough as they were, as violent as they were, they actually were morally, in certain ways, superior to what came after. Although Cyrus was much more humane in how he handled exiled people. Under Cyrus, the Jews returned to their land, but evidently there were other aspects of the Medo-Persian Empire which made it silver rather than gold. And then the Greco-Macedonian was less. It had less character to it. And then the final, Roman Empire, evidently from a character point of view, had the least. That was what it would seem. But anyway, he goes on to say in verse 39, "But after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth." Now, there's a lot more significance than what I'm saying today. I'm just going over the basics of what Daniel tells him. "And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others." So now you have the great Roman Empire that absorbs all of the territory that had been a part of the earlier empire. Although there was trouble with Persia itself, but Persia itself remained on the outside. The Parthians were there, but the empire did extend all the way what is today the United Kingdom, well beyond what any of the others had from that perspective, and did control almost all of what the Medo-Persians had, except for Iran itself. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. So here you have unlike materials, some of which are brittle, can be broken, and some are strong. And this is the final stage of that empire. You see, you have legs, and then you have feet and toes. So you have history taking place, and finally you come to the end, and you have feet and toes. And I'm just going to give you my 10 fingers. I'm not going to take my shoes off and show you my toes. So you have the feet at the end and the 10 toes. So we can understand as we put the Bible, as we gather other data, this chapter should be looked at in connection with Revelation 17. This final Roman Empire is the final empire. There are 4, and this is the final one. This is the one that Christ will overcome. Well, obviously, the ancient Roman Empire ended, but various resurrections of it took place, and there'll be yet another. And it'll be that final resurrection of the Roman Empire that will oppose Jesus Christ at his coming, and he will overcome it, of course. And that's what's covered here. We come to the end of that human figure. We go from the head to the toes, and we have 10 toes at the end. And we know from Revelation there'll be 10 kings that will oppose Jesus Christ at the end in a brief confederation, because they're not really, you wouldn't expect them normally to come together like that. It's iron and clay. Some are weak nations, some are strong nations, but they come together and they rule much of the world for a time, and they oppose Jesus Christ at his coming, and he overcomes them. In fact, we have that foreshadowed in the Purim account, in the book of Esther, which I referred to earlier. You have the 10 sons of Haman that are hanged at the end of that account. That's symbolic of that's foreshadowing the 10 kings whom Jesus Christ will overcome. Anyway, let's get back to the account here. In verse 42, and as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. This is what is coming, and Daniel foresaw it in his day, all the way back, around 25 centuries ago. Inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. And amen. We know that is how history is going to work out. Then King Nebuchadnezzar, this was a very positive vision for him at this point, because he's the head of gold. And now he knows how history is going to work out all the way centuries ahead. So he has to be, if possible, with his personality, he has to be humbled by the fact that God gave him this information. Gave it, of course, through Daniel. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. That the king answered Daniel and said, "Truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret." If only he had kept that thought, right? Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief administrator of all the wise men of Babylon, like what happened to Joseph in earlier days in Egypt. Also, Daniel petitioned the king that he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king. And here, it would seem that he's much younger than Joseph was. He may be about 20 at this time, and here he's already being given such tremendous responsibility, and the young men with him as well. So we have two miracles in this chapter. We have the fact that he knew the dream ahead of time, and the fact that he interpreted it. And of course, it came from God. Now, when you read the book of Daniel, when you read the biography of this man, and also material about the three, what sometimes they're called in the folklore, the Hebrew children, the three young Jewish men with Daniel. When you read the book of Daniel, you understand the importance of having the courage of your convictions. In Jewish tradition, we have the principle of pikuach nefesh, that you're supposed to live by God's laws. You don't die by the laws. So if it's a matter of life and death, for example, you can, for example, violate the Sabbath to help somebody in need, etc. But there are three things that Jews will die rather than violate, and that is murder, adultery, and idolatry. That's something for which a Jew would prefer martyrdom to violating. And in this case, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were willing to be martyred rather than, be idol worshippers. Another point about Daniel is his personal courage, as I said, the courage of his convictions, and continuing to pray in chapter 6, even when it was forbidden. So we see the importance of prayer in the book of Daniel. So Daniel is an important book for building our faith and developing a commitment to follow God's way and to avoid these pitfalls. And in addition to that, it's a warning to people in charge, and realizing that God is in control, and it's not necessarily because you're so great that you're where you are. It may be a matter that you're not so great at all, but it's God decided for His reasons to put you where you are. I'll state one verse, even though it's I'm running out of the time I allot myself for these talks, but I'll go to Daniel 4 and verse 7. Then the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. I'm sorry, I want to go to verse 17. Did I say 7? Let's go to verse 17. The decision is by the decree of the watchers, and the sentence by the word of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, gives it to whomsoever He will, and sets over it the lowest of men. If that's what He wants to do, that's what He will do. So people who are in charge, as I've said, over these days as I give these messages, if you are in a position of responsibility, look at it as an opportunity to serve other people, use your authority to benefit those to whom you're accountable. And that's a lesson we can also get from this book of Daniel. So there are a lot of lessons that we can derive from the book, and we can certainly be inspired by the life of this man who was both a statesman and a prophet. I want to go to Acts, to Acts the 3rd chapter, and here we see that all through history, God has inspired His servants to preach about this coming kingdom of God, and we need to look forward to that kingdom from day to day, particularly on the Sabbath day, but from day to day, to look forward to that kingdom and to try to represent it in our own, little corner of the world, to be representatives of that kingdom. In Acts 3 and verse 19, we're told, "Repent therefore and be converted, that your sins may be blotted out, so that times of refreshing may come from the presence of the Lord, and that He may send Jesus Christ, who was preached to you before, whom heaven must receive until the times of restoration of all things, which God has spoken by the mouth of all His holy prophets since the world began." We look forward to God's kingdom as Daniel did, and Daniel was indeed one of those who was inspired to warn the world and encourage the world about the coming of God's kingdom, because Daniel was both a statesman and a prophet. All the best to you and yours.